The day was overcast, with a leaden sky that seemed to mirror the oppressive mood enveloping the courtroom. As if nature itself was bespeaking the heavy atmosphere within those stark walls, the clouds hung low, casting shadows that crept across the faces of those gathered. Inside the modern judicial chamber of the Metropolitan Courthouse, tension vibrated in the air like an electric current, palpable and foreboding. Every element of the room, from the gleaming polished wooden benches that had been meticulously arranged to the rows of solemn observers whose expressions reflected deep concern and anticipation, contributed to a sense of gravity that was both oppressive and inescapable. The imposing portrait of Lady Justice, blindfolded and wielding her scales, hung heavily on the wall, a stark reminder of the ideals of fairness and impartiality that felt increasingly distant. Yet behind this facade of order and fairness, unseen currents of prejudice stirred, lurking like dark clouds ready to unleash a storm, as whispers braided together tales of bias and judgment that challenged the very foundation of justice. It was a moment poised on the edge, teetering between the hope for truth and the fear of entrenched injustice, awaiting an inevitable reckoning. As the clock ticked ominously in the background, the judge took her seat, her gavel poised like a bird of prey ready to strike. The murmur of the crowd tapered into an expectant hush, their collective breath held tight as they awaited the opening statements. The defense attorney, a wiry figure with sharp features, rose slowly from his seat, adjusting his tie with a nervous flicker of his hands. He looked around the room, his gaze lingering momentarily on the jury before he began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," he started, his voice smooth yet strained under the weight of scrutiny, "today we are called to reflect on a matter that extends beyond legal statutes and procedural intricacies." He sought to instill a narrative that would resonate, a story that transcended mere facts and numbers to spotlight human emotions embroiled in this case. Across the room, the prosecution sat with a steely resolve. A poised woman in her early 30s, her demeanor betrayed no hint of uncertainty as she shuffled through her meticulously prepared notes. She knew the stakes were high. A guilty verdict could change lives irrevocably. Standing to deliver her statement, she unleashed her passion, voice rising and falling like the tide as she spoke of the victim, a bright young man with a promising future cut short by violence. "We are here to honor his memory," she declared, her emotion piercing through the somber atmosphere, "and to ensure that justice is not just an abstract concept, but a reality for those who have suffered the unimaginable." The audience shifted, the air thickening with empathy and unvoiced questions. In the back, a faint shuffle echoed, drawing the attention of those nearby. A woman sat gripping the arms of her chair, her knuckles white, a photograph clutched tightly in her hand. It was a picture of the victim, a reminder of her brother's laughter, that warmth that had once filled their home. Her heart raced as she listened to the testimonies unfold, each word seeming to scrape against her sense of loss, knitting together a fabric of grief that enveloped her like a shroud. Would her cries for justice be heard? Would this day return a semblance of peace to her shattered family? The trial rolled onward. Each piece of evidence introduced weighed not only on the scales of justice, but also on the tapestry of shared humanity. Jurors exchanged furtive glances, their expressions a blend of contemplation and apprehension. Could they untangle the threads woven with fear and bias? As the day wore on, the sun began its descent, casting a wan light that flickered shyly through the courtroom windows, a stark reminder that time was slipping away. The stakes grew with every passing moment, and on this long, harrowing journey, each participant, the judge, jury, attorneys, and witnesses, were bound together in a fragile pact, united by hope, driven by conviction, and haunted by the specter of doubt. At the center of today's trial stood Judge Harold Emerson, a man well into his 70s with strikingly white hair that contrasted starkly against the dark wood of the courtroom. His reputation as a legal figure was formidable, echoing through the halls of the court like a reverberating drum. Known for his strict adherence to what he believed was traditional justice, Judge Emerson's legal record was as controversial as it was extensive, marked by landmark cases that had tested the boundaries of the law and public sentiment alike. Many in the legal community whispered about his subtle biases, particularly regarding issues of race and gender, suggesting that his views were often clouded by outdated perspectives and an insular worldview shaped by decades in a changing society. Yet within this charged atmosphere, there was a young public defender named Clara who had just stepped into the courtroom for her first trial. Her heart raced as she took her place beside her client, a young man caught in the unforgiving grip of the law. Clara was all too aware of the towering figure of the judge, whose formidable reputation preceded him. She had heard stories of his swift rulings and sharp rebukes that left seasoned lawyers trembling. But Clara was determined not to be intimidated. With a quiet resolve, she focused on her client, reminding herself of the importance of the truth over the judge's established biases. As the judge began to deliver the opening remarks, Clara forged a mental shield against his commanding presence. She concentrated on the case details, the evidence, and her strategy, her mind racing through every possible scenario that could unfold. The importance of her role felt heavier now, as she understood that for many this courtroom embodied not just a legal battle, but a fight for dignity and justice. With each witness called to the stand, Clara's heart pounded in rhythm with the beats of the gavel. She carefully noted the judge's reactions and the subtle leanings of the jury, piecing together the narrative that was shaping itself in the minds of those present. The way he questioned the witnesses bore the mark of his years of experience, but it also whispered hints of a predetermined narrative he wished to endorse. Clara could sense the thin line defining right from wrong, blurring under the weight of the judge's assumptions. One witness, an alibi, stood up to deliver his account. His voice trembled, but Clara kept her gaze fixed on the judge, watching for any signs of bias that she could exploit. She prepared her lines of questioning, determined to guide the court toward the truth, a truth she felt was fragile in the face of the judge's imposing demeanor. Clara knew that convincing the jury would require not just evidence, but an emotional appeal that resonated with their own experiences of justice and fairness. As days turned into weeks, the trial dragged on, each session revealing layers of complexity in the case. The judge's eyes flickered with amusement at the defense's challenges, but Clara took heart in the small victories. The moments when she could shift his gaze toward her client rather than his own perceptions. Slowly, she began to chip away at the preconceptions that loomed like a dark shadow in the courtroom. By weaving in personal stories and genuine appeals, she fought not just for a verdict, but for recognition of the humanity behind the accusations. In the moments of pause, when the gavel struck and the room filled with murmurs, Clara often caught glimpses of the judge's face, a mix of disdain and curiosity. She began to wonder if there was a flicker of doubt, perhaps even reflection in his steely facade. Could it be possible that her persistence would reach even the most entrenched of minds? With every passing day, the courtroom became a battleground for ideals, the clash of ruthlessness against compassion and authority against advocacy. As she took her place in front of the court, Clara glanced at her client, who sat nervously at the defendant's table. She could see the worry etched on his face, the shadows of doubt creeping into his eyes. This was not just a legal battle, it was a fight for his dignity, his future, and perhaps even his very identity. Clara cleared her throat and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. With a firm grip on her notes, she began to weave together the threads of evidence and emotion that had built up throughout the trial. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Clara began, her voice steady but filled with passion. "Today we are not merely deciding a case. We are confronting the very principles upon which our legal system stands. Justice is not just a set of rules to be applied coldly. It is an embodiment of our shared humanity." Her eyes flickered to the jurors, gauging their reactions, hoping to invoke empathy that transcended the legal jargon. As she spoke, she reminded them of the testimonies that had echoed in the courtroom, the witness who had stepped forward despite their fear, the emotional statements from family members, and the expert opinions that were not only factual but deeply personal. Each tale was a brushstroke on the canvas of her argument. Clara emphasized the importance of seeing her client as a real person, not just a case number. Behind the evidence and the legal terms lies a narrative that deserves to be told, that deserves to be heard. She passionately argued that the decision they were about to make would resonate far beyond the walls of the courtroom. It will shape the very fabric of our community, influencing how we treat each other, how we value justice, and how we uphold the truth. If we fail to recognize the nuances of this case, we risk undermining the progress we have fought so hard to achieve. As her voice rose, Clara caught a glimpse of the jury exchanging furtive looks, their expressions shifting from skepticism to introspection. The glimmer of hope lit within her as she pressed on, detailing the systemic failures that had led to this moment. the biases that had lingered too long, and the assumptions that had clouded judgment. Each point was a brick laid in her foundation of justice. Finally, she drew her argument to a close, invoking the power of choice that lay within the jury's hands. You have the ability to not just decide a verdict, but to choose compassion over indifference, to choose justice over convenience. I urge you to look deep into your hearts and consider what this verdict will mean, not just for my client, but for all of us. As she stepped back, Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her, though the uncertainty remained. It was now in the jury's hands, a room filled with individuals bound by their duty to determine the fate laid before them. And as they deliberated, Clara held her breath, waiting to see if justice would shine through the murkiness of fear and prejudice, or if it would falter at the last moment. Hope and dread intertwined, turning the air heavy as she contemplated the impending verdict. Clara's thoughts drifted back to the moments that had led her here, each decision poised like a delicate balance beam, teetering on the edge of fate. Memories flooded her mind, the shouts of accusation, the disbelief etched on her friends' and family's faces as they took sides, the courtroom's walls echoing with the weight of testimonies. She recalled the passionate arguments of her lawyer, each word a desperate plea for understanding against the rigid backdrop of suspicion. What could she do now but wait? The pitter-patter of her heart mimicked the ticking clock, each second stretching into an eternity. Outside the courthouse, the world moved on, oblivious to her personal crisis. She caught glimpses of passers-by, their lives continuing seamlessly, juxtaposed against her turmoil. Some smiled and laughed, while others looked somber, perhaps carrying their own burdens unbeknownst to her. In that moment, she realized she wasn't alone. Every face in the crowd had a story filled with trials and tribulations. But what did her story mean in the greater narrative? Would her truth finally emerge, or would it be drowned by the cacophony of lies and fabrications? As the minutes dragged on, she remembered her mother's words about courage and the importance of standing up for oneself, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Clara tightened her fists, a new resolve settling in her chest. She would not be defined by this moment, nor would she allow disenchantment to darken her spirit. As time slipped away, the doors of the deliberation room creaked open. A hush fell over the gallery, and Clara's heart raced violently within her. It was time. With each step the jury foreman took toward the podium, the room seemed to hold its breath, a collective anticipation vibrating in the air. Clara sat taller, her eyes locked onto his face, desperate for any hint of the verdict hanging just beyond the unseen veil. "We have reached a verdict," he began, his voice steady yet somber. Every syllable felt like a drop of rain in a still pond, creating ripples of anxiety that spread throughout the courtroom. Clara closed her eyes for a second, summoning every ounce of strength she had as the juror continued. "We, the jury, find the defendant." Across the polished expanse of the bench, seated with a posture that radiated quiet confidence, was a woman whose calm demeanor belied the storm of challenges she had faced throughout her life. Her name was Aisha Roberts. Of African descent, she had navigated the complicated labyrinth of the judicial system with an unwavering commitment to truth and a profound sense of dignity. Each step of her journey was marked by perseverance, fighting not only against the biases she encountered, but also against the prevalent stereotypes that often overshadowed her achievements. Today, as she sat poised in her chair, the weight of the case before her, which had consumed so many corners of public discourse, felt heavy on her shoulders. Yet in a twist of fate that seemed almost scripted, her true authority remained cloaked in anonymity. Up until this moment, no one in the courtroom had recognized her as the lead prosecutor. Unbeknownst to Judge Emerson and the weary spectators watching from the gallery, Aisha Roberts was not merely a member of the legal team. She was the state's appointed prosecutor in a case that had rattled the city's core, one that dealt with allegations of corruption and deceit that threatened to unravel the very fabric of their community. As the murmurs of the onlookers swirled around her, Aisha prepared herself, steeling her resolve to make her voice heard in a place where such a voice was all too often muted. In that moment of silence, Aisha took a deep breath, knowing that the outcomes of this case could redefine trust in the system she had dedicated her life to serve. It was not just about justice for the victims, who had been wronged by allies turned adversaries, but also about restoring faith in a community that had begun to lose its way. The gravity of her responsibility weighed heavily, but deep within, her conviction fueled her resolve. She recalled her years in law school, each textbook lesson not just a theory but a reminder of the humans behind the laws meant to protect them. The courtroom buzzed softly as whispers escalated into murmurs of dread. Reputations were at stake, and the stakes were high. As the judge entered and silence fell, Aisha adjusted her glasses and settled in, ready to unveil the evidence that had been painstakingly gathered over months. From meticulously recorded testimonies to the hard numbers that clearly mapped the root of graft and betrayals, Aisha was equipped with the tools she needed, each piece meticulously selected for its capacity to tell the story, a story not just about corruption, but about hope and redemption. Your Honor, her voice rang out with a confidence that startled even her. If it pleases the court, I will begin by outlining the foundation of our case. As she spoke, she maintained eye contact with the jury, drawing them into the web of deception that intertwined with the lives of the victims. A glimmer of determination flashed across her eyes. She was not just there to prosecute, but to honor the voices of those who had been silenced. Her words flowed seamlessly, interweaving facts with the emotional impact they had on the community, invoking empathy and understanding. With every piece of evidence presented, Aisha could feel the atmosphere shift. Heads nodded slightly, eyes widened in realization. It was becoming clear that this case was not just about the individuals sitting in the defendant's box. It was about the collective struggle for justice that stretched far beyond the courtroom walls. Each revelation served as a mirror, reflecting the shadows of mistrust that had loomed over the city for far too long. She knew that with each revelation, she was nudging the scales of justice back toward equilibrium. Aisha concluded her opening statement with a pledge that resonated deeply within her. Today, we seek not just a conviction, she said, her voice steady, but a restoration of faith. Faith in our justice system, faith in one another, and faith in the idea that accountability is paramount to healing. The silence that followed echoed loudly, a moment of shared understanding between her and the jury. It was a call to arms, compelling them to acknowledge their role in the pursuit of justice, not merely as passive observers, but as active participants in a society striving for equity and truth. As she sat down, the weight of anticipation hung in the air. She glanced around the courtroom, catching the eye of a few weary faces, some hopeful, others hardened by the struggle they had faced in the aftermath of betrayal. Tomorrow would bring more witnesses, and Aisha knew without a doubt that this was only the beginning of what was destined to be a long and arduous journey toward justice. Yet as she folded her hands on the table, her heart swelled with a quiet assurance. She was ready to fight, fueled by the courage of all those who believed the change was possible, knowing that every step forward mattered. The case under scrutiny was one of high public interest. Allegations of financial malfeasance intertwined with charges that hinted at a larger conspiracy within municipal institutions, suggesting a pervasive corruption that had, for too long, gone unchecked. This was not just a trial, it was a microcosm of the systemic issues plaguing the community, where power dynamics shifted under the surface like turbulent waters. Yet beneath the overtly intricate legal arguments lurked an undercurrent of racial injustice, a subject far too relevant in modern society, echoing the voices of countless residents who felt marginalized and overlooked in a system that seemed rigged against them. As the trial unfolded, every word, every gesture, and every pause was imbued with significance far beyond the legal realm, a reflection of a society grappling with its conscience and striving for accountability. The courtroom became a battleground, not just for legal supremacy, but for the very essence of justice. As the ramifications of this case reached into the lives of everyday people, igniting discussions about equity and truth in a world where such values were constantly tested. As testimonies rolled in, the atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation and trepidation. Each day brought fresh revelations that deepened the scars of distrust among the community members who gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs that called for justice and reform. The air was thick with the weight of history, echoing the struggles of generations past. Activists from various backgrounds joined forces, sharing their stories of prejudice and disenfranchisement, amplifying the voices of those who had long been silenced. It became clear that this trial was not merely about the individuals on the stand. It symbolized a larger battle against a system that had perpetuated inequality, a system that often turned a blind eye to the plight of its most vulnerable citizens. As evidence was presented, the prosecution painted a picture of a network of deceit that ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Witnesses came forth to recount their experiences, some recalling the chilling moments when they had witnessed misconduct firsthand, while others revealed the coercive tactics employed to maintain silence. The defense sought to dismantle these testimonies systematically, attempting to cast doubt on the credibility of each witness. Yet their arguments were undermined by the palpable sense of urgency from the gallery, where spectators exchanged furtive glances and whispered discussions about the implications of each day's events. Meanwhile, local media coverage turned the spotlight onto issues of race and power, with pundits analyzing how socioeconomic status intersected with the alleged corruption. Editorials echoed the frustrations of a community that had grown weary of empty promises and stagnant change, fueling protests that demanded not only justice for the trial, but a broader reform of local governance. People began to organize in town halls and community forums, driven by a newfound sense of empowerment, determined to reshape their narrative beyond the courtroom's confines. With each passing week, the trial advanced, and so too did the discussions surrounding it, engrossing the community in dialogues ranging from the legal definitions of corruption to the ethical responsibilities of elected officials. Scholars and activists joined forces, drafting policy proposals intended to address the deep-seated issues laid bare by the proceedings. The resonance of this case began to ripple beyond the courthouse doors, inspiring a movement that sought to reclaim agency and dismantle systemic injustices. As the verdict drew near, the tension was palpable. Stakeholders prepared for all possible outcomes, some with hope glimmering in their hearts while others braced for disappointment. However, amid the uncertainty, there lingered a shared understanding that this trial had illuminated both the fractures and the resilience of the community. Regardless of the final ruling, the journey toward accountability had only just begun, and a collective resolve to foster change was now deeply rooted in the hearts of those who had gathered, as they stood united in their quest for a more just and equitable society. The courtroom quieted as Judge Emerson banged his gavel, a sharp sound echoing through the air like the strike of a clock marking a new hour, signaling the start of formal proceedings. In that instant, a palpable tension filled the room, thick enough to be cut with a knife. The prosecutorial team had taken their places on one side of the room, a well-prepared group exuding confidence and authority, while the defense's tables were arranged opposite them, their posture reflecting a mixture of anxiety and determination. It was common knowledge that within such environments, unspoken hierarchies governed the exchange of words and the very movement of those present. For generations, the courtroom had been viewed as a citadel of impartiality, a sanctuary where justice reigned supreme, and every voice was meant to carry equal weight. However, reality was far more complex. Prejudices seeped into every crevice of the judicial system, often unrecognized by those who held the gavel or wore the robes. The nuances of class, race, and privilege influenced decisions in ways that the ivory towers of justice would prefer to deny. In this theater of law and order, the stakes were not just legal, but deeply personal, as lives hung in the balance, and the true measure of equity was tested each day the gavel fell. The sound of footsteps echoed softly as the accused was led into the room, clad in a stark orange jumpsuit that instantly marked him as an outlier amongst the other attendees, many of whom were dressed in tailored suits and colorful blouses. A murmur rippled through the crowd, the tension thickening. His dark hair was unkempt, eyes darting nervously around the thoroughfare of justice that appeared imposing and unforgiving. For him, today was not merely a day in court. It was the culmination of months of mounting dread, a consequence of choices made under circumstances that few truly understood. As he took his seat next to his attorney, an air of resignation settled upon him. The defense attorney, a middle-aged woman with sharp features, leaned in to speak quietly, her voice a blend of encouragement and urgency. "Remember, we have a strategy. We just need to stick to it." Her presence was reassuring, like an anchor in tumultuous waters. Across the aisle, the prosecutor, an impressively composed man with a reputation for winning cases, was meticulously reviewing his notes, tightening a leather binder in his grip, as though to summon the universe's alignment to his favor. Judge Emerson surveyed the room, his keen gaze observing the interplay of fear and hope, the essence of human nature laid bare in the stark confines of justice. His gavel rested lightly in his hand, a reminder that he wielded the authority to shift the tides of fate with a single strike. Clearing his throat, he prepared to deliver the opening remarks that would initiate the dance of argumentation, persuasion, and sometimes artful manipulation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Judge Emerson began, his voice steady, "you have been selected for a duty that is both an honor and a weighty responsibility. Your task is to sift through the evidence presented, not with preconceptions, but with the lens of impartiality that this court demands. The truth is not merely a collection of facts, but a narrative shaped by perspectives, biases included." As the judge spoke, the walls of the courtroom seemed to breathe in synchrony with the specter of truth hanging ominously in the air. In the gallery, a young woman caught the witness stand in her periphery, her hands clenched, struggling to contain a whirlwind of thoughts. Perhaps she was the victim in this tale, aptly reflective of the very complexities that the judge alluded to. Her story, woven with threads of pain and hope, was about to be unraveled for all to see, a vulnerability under the fluorescent glare of justice. Outside the courtroom, the world continued to move, unaware of the seismic shifts that could occur within these four walls. Protesters had gathered, armed with placards bearing slogans demanding equity and justice, voices rising in a cacophony that underscored the diverse perspectives intersecting at this point of contention. Television cameras recorded every moment, broadcasting the drama of human existence to the masses, while the real intricacies, the heart of the matter, remained simmering beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. As the opening statements commenced, the room held its breath, teetering on the brink of revelation. Each word weighed heavy with potential. The narrative of guilt or innocence ready to unfold in this crucible, where the lives of individuals intertwined with societal expectations, the law, and the ever-elusive idea of justice. In his opening statement, Judge Emerson's tone was clipped and formal, each word meticulously chosen to convey authority and gravitas. Yet beneath the surface, there bubbled an undercurrent of disdain for those who did not conform to his rigid standards of dignity and propriety. The courtroom, with its polished wood and high ceilings, felt like a theater where Emerson played the role of the uncompromising arbiter, relishing his power to decide the fates of others. When a junior attorney, her voice marked by a distinctly accented tone, ventured to offer an observation that diverged from his script, Judge Emerson's eyes flicked in her direction for a moment, a flash of irritation crossing his otherwise composed expression before he dismissed her presence altogether. It was a microcosm of his approach, a primeval display of authority that served as a silent reminder of his skewed perspective. To him, the proceedings unfolded not merely as an examination of evidence and truth, but through a lens tainted by racial and gender bias, reinforcing the unequal dynamics that had persisted long before this day in court. The tension in the room was palpable, each observer acutely aware of the implicit hierarchy at play. The junior attorney, her cheeks flushed with a mix of determination and dread, collected herself for another attempt. She grasped her notes tightly, the tremor in her hands betraying her composed exterior. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steadier this time, "I would like to draw the court's attention to—" But before she could finish, the judge interrupted, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "I believe we have already covered that point," he retorted, his eyes narrowing. The silence that followed was thick with disbelief as a few murmurs rippled through the gallery, reflective of the unspoken frustrations that lingered among the observers. Outside the courthouse, the world proceeded with its mundane rhythm, unaware of the intricate battles waging inside. Protesters gathered, their chants rising like a tide against the very injustices the junior attorney sought to address. Banners that read "Justice for All" fluttered in the wind, a stark contrast to the isolating atmosphere of the courtroom. Each voice outside represented a longing for change, their hopes intertwined with her resolve. She imagined the faces of those who needed justice, not just from the past, but for the present, as she felt their spirits lift her resolve like an unseen force. As the proceedings dragged on, the courtroom became a stage for not only legal argumentation, but for deep-rooted societal issues. When a witness was called to the stand, a woman of color with a compelling story that spoke to systemic oppression, Judge Emerson's expression hardened. The witness's narrative illuminated the intimate struggles faced daily by individuals who grappled with biases similar to those living in the very court that purported to deliver justice. As she spoke, Intertwining facts with a heartfelt plea, her presence began to challenge the judge's stringent adherence to propriety, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable realities that lay just beneath the polished veneer of the courtroom. Yet Emerson retained his stoic demeanor, clinging to the familiar boundaries of his authority. He scanned the gallery as if gauging their reactions, perhaps worried about the unraveling of his deeply ingrained biases. The audience, consisting of community members and activists, leaned in closer. They hung on every word of the witness, recognizing within her narrative the threads of their own experiences. As closing arguments approached, the junior attorney reclaimed her confidence, emboldened not just by the witness's courage, but by the undeniable support of those rallying outside. She realized that the case extended beyond legal proceedings. It was a movement, a call for equity that resonated far beyond the four walls of the courtroom. In that moment, Judge Emerson was not just a figure of authority, he was an embodiment of the systemic issues that perpetuated discrimination. And as she prepared to make her final statement, she resolved to speak not just for her client, but for those silenced by a system that often failed to recognize their humanity. In the end, the palpable sense of change ignited within the courtroom lingered, a reminder that justice, like the pursuit of truth, was not merely a destination. It was an ongoing journey fraught with challenges, resilience, and the hope for a more equitable tomorrow. Meanwhile, Aisha Roberts sat poised, her notebooks meticulously arranged beside her, each page filled with a whirlwind of observations, intricate notes, and carefully crafted strategies that showcased her comprehensive grasp of the case at hand. The crisp pages, adorned with annotations and highlights, served as a testament to her relentless work ethic and dedication. Her expression remained neutral yet alert, a carefully constructed facade that masked the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. Scenarios replayed, potential outcomes assessed, and the weight of responsibility settled firmly on her shoulders. Renowned for her professionalism and keen analytical acumen, Aisha was not just a legal advocate. She was a steadfast guardian of justice, fueled by a deep-seated belief that justice should not be a distant ideal, but a tangible right that echoes through the lives of every individual, regardless of their background. As she scanned the courtroom, her awareness sharpened. She sensed the subtle undercurrents of the proceedings, a complex interplay of emotions and ambitions that would inevitably shape the lives intertwined in this momentous trial. Across the room, the opposing counsel, a seasoned attorney named Marcus Halstead, exuded an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. His tailored suit and polished demeanor reflected years of experience in the courtroom, and he radiated an unwavering belief in his case. Aisha could see the subtle smirk forming at the corner of his mouth as he prepared to launch into his opening statement, a calculated maneuver designed to sway the jury before they even began to engage with the evidence. Gritting her teeth, Aisha remained grounded, knowing that the battle was not won in the opening moments, but through careful navigation of the storm that lay ahead. With the gavel's echo still resonating through the hall, Marcus leaned forward, voice smooth and persuasive. His words flowed like silk, painting a picture that cast doubt on her client's integrity and framed the narrative in his favor. Aisha listened keenly, dissecting every syllable, every inflection, and every calculated pause to uncover the cracks in his argument. Today, she was more than a witness to the proceedings. She was an architect of her client's defense, determined to build a robust rebuttal against the facade that Marcus sought to create. As he concluded his statement, Aisha felt a surge of adrenaline pulse through her veins. It propelled her toward the moment when she would rise to her feet and counter his assertions. In her mind, she rehearsed the key points she had meticulously crafted, ready to dismantle the accusations with irrefutable evidence and poignant testimonies that had been painstakingly gathered. She envisioned herself commanding the space, projecting authority as she articulated not just the truth of her client, but the very essence of justice itself. In that fleeting moment, she recalled the stories of those whose lives had been touched by her work, the families who had found solace in her unwavering commitment to their cause. These thoughts anchored her, reminding her that this trial was not merely about winning or losing. It was about restoring dignity and ensuring that no one would have to navigate the tempest of the legal system alone. With a deep breath, she straightened her posture, meeting Marcus's gaze with a fierce determination that promised a formidable contest ahead. As the trial unfolded, the courtroom became a theater of emotions. Some jurors leaned forward, engrossed, while others scribbled notes, clearly drawn into the drama playing out before them. Witness after witness testified, each story layered with complexity, revealing the intertwined fates of those involved. Aisha maneuvered through the testimonies, remaining vigilant, extracting truths that would fortify her case. With every word spoken, the delicate balance shifted, ebbing and flowing like tides under a moonlit night. Aisha felt the rhythm of the trial resonate with her heartbeat, surging with confidence whenever she caught a glimpse of understanding in the jury's eyes. As she prepared for her turn, she reminded herself that her true strength lay not just in her legal acumen, but in her ability to connect with the jury on a human level, to convey not only the facts, but the profound impact of their decisions. As the day drew to a close, Aisha remained in her seat, contemplating the unfolding narrative. The courtroom, with its polished wood and solemn atmosphere, stood as a testament to the ideals she cherished. With a resolve strengthened by each passing moment, she knew the true battle for justice was just beginning, and she was ready to lead the charge. Throughout the morning sessions, she observed the courtroom dynamics closely, keenly aware that every word uttered could alter the trajectory of lives entwined in this case. Whenever Judge Emerson's comments tipped into a condescending tone, especially when addressing members of the opposing counsel or even the often overlooked courtroom staff, Aisha felt a weight settling on her shoulders. The subtle yet pervasive air of superiority grated on her, but she resisted the urge to react outwardly. Instead, she maintained her focus, channeling any frustration into a steely resolve. Outside the courtroom, Aisha's phone buzzed incessantly. It was her assistant, Mia, sending updates about their ongoing case preparations. Aisha could sense the urgency behind each text message, and an uneasy knot tightened in her stomach. She had promised Mia that she would focus on the trial, but the weight of the outside world loomed large. Sighing, she glanced at the text that read, "The new witness is on standby. I suggest we prepare for her testimony." This was a turning point in their strategy, and Aisha knew that every detail needed to be flawless. As the lunch break approached, Aisha decided to take a short walk to gather her thoughts. The hallway buzzed with lawyers, clerks, and witnesses, all moving in one direction or another, their conversations a jumbled symphony of legal terminology and anxious chit-chat. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool air of the corridor revive her resolve. It was vital to maintain a level head, especially with the jury observing her every expression and body language. Returning to the courtroom, Aisha noticed how the jury was subtly influenced by Judge Emerson's demeanor. She watched as they shifted in their seats, their gaze either fixated on him or drifting towards their notes. Aisha realized she had to pivot her strategy. It was not just about the facts of the case anymore. It was about perception. She needed to connect with the jury, to make them see the human side of the arguments at play, to draw them into the narrative she was crafting. The courtroom doors creaked open, and the session resumed. She straightened her suit jacket, her heart pounding with renewed determination. The prosecution had laid down solid groundwork, and now it was her turn to dismantle their arguments methodically. She presented her opening statement with a calm confidence that belied the storm of emotions swirling within her. Aisha focused on a story that not only showcased the strengths of her defense, but also presented her client not as a mere figure in a case, but as a person with a life, dreams, and dignity. With every passing moment, she noticed how the jury began to lean in, engaged and attentive. Aisha sensed a shift in the atmosphere, like a tide turning. It wasn't just about the case against her client anymore. It was about justice, fairness, and the profound impact of their decision. Each question she posed, each piece of evidence she introduced, was meticulously curated to weave a narrative that resonated with their human experience. Her confidence grew, fortified by the belief that she was doing more than just her job. She was fighting for someone who needed her purpose and dedication. As the day dragged on, Aisha steeled herself against the inevitable objections from the opposing counsel, determined to remain unshakable. With each clash of arguments, she discovered a deeper commitment to her cause. Courtroom battles were rarely won on the merit of facts alone. They were won in the subtleties of delivery, the emotional resonance, and the ability to connect with people. With that understanding, Aisha prepared to take on the next round with fortified conviction. Her internal mantra was clear. She was not merely there to prosecute a case. She stood as a beacon against an insidious system that subtly yet decisively threatened to undermine human dignity. In those moments, the stakes felt monumentally high. This was more than just a trial. It was a battle for accountability, a stand against the unyielding forces that sought to diminish the voices of those who dared to speak out against injustice. Filled with purpose, Aisha was determined to ensure that the principles of justice and equality were not just concepts discussed in textbooks, but lived and experienced realities for everyone who walked through the courtroom door. Aisha could feel the weight of countless eyes upon her, each gaze filled with hope, fear, and the yearning for vindication. As the evidence began to unfold, she recalled the faces of the victims, those whose lives were irrevocably altered by the events leading up to this trial. Each testimony echoed in her mind, serving as a reminder that for every legal term she used, for every argument she presented, there lay a vivid story cloaked in pain, resilience, and the quest for justice. The courtroom was a microcosm of society, a place where power dynamics played out in real time. Aisha was painfully aware that the opposing counsel was skilled, a master at manipulating narratives, often obscuring the truth with eloquent rhetoric. Yet her resolve deepened with each session. She was not just prepared to respond to their tactics. She had vowed to anticipate them, a strategist in a war of words. As witness after witness took the stand, Aisha meticulously noted the patterns of their testimonies, recognizing the threads of a larger narrative weaving them together. She saw the raw power of vulnerability transformed into strength. The act of speaking out became a collective plea for fairness and recognition. Each story added another layer to her case, reinforcing her belief that the pursuit of justice was not just about the verdict, it was fundamentally about empowering those who believed they had been silenced. Outside the courtroom, protests swelled, community members rallying in support of the victims. Banners waved with slogans demanding accountability and systemic reform. Aisha found herself inspired by this grassroots movement. The air buzzed with solidarity and a shared vision for a more just society. Social media erupted with hashtags that echoed their calls. Her task was more than legal. It was also a message to the world that they were all participants in this struggle against oppression. As Aisha presented her closing argument, she spoke not just to the jury, but to every individual who had ever doubted their voice mattered. Her words swelled with urgency, reminding them of their collective responsibility to confront injustice. This trial, she asserted, is not merely about one case. It stands as a testament to the resilience of those who have fought for their dignity in a world that often devalues it. Let us not forget, while we deliberate, that we are tasked with safeguarding not just the rights of a few, but the very fabric of our society. With her heart racing, Aisha took a breath, knowing that regardless of the verdict, this journey had already shifted perceptions, had already ignited conversations about reform, and had already begun to heal wounds, for her and for those who dared to dream of a different future. The courtroom, once just a room of cold walls and formalities, had transformed into a crucible of change. And in this moment, she realized that true justice would always remain an evolving pursuit, requiring tenacity, courage, and the unwavering belief that change is indeed possible. As the trial progressed, Aisha found herself faced with unexpected challenges. The defense team, skilled and relentless, spun a web of doubt around the testimonies of the victims. They presented what seemed to be credible alibis, a parade of witnesses whose voices echoed in the courtroom, casting shadowy veils over the truths Aisha held dear. Yet amidst the turbulence, Aisha drew strength from the faces of those she represented. She visualized their struggles, the anger, the pain, and ultimately the hope that had brought them all to this pivotal moment. Each day in court became a testament not just to the events at hand, but to the stories of resilience and courage that had been painstakingly woven into their lives. As the days turned into a blur of testimonies and tactical legal maneuvers, Aisha began to notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the courtroom. The jurors, once impassive, seemed to lean in closer, their eyes narrowing as they absorbed the weight of each revelation. It was as if the very air crackled with an unspoken understanding, a shared awareness that beneath the layers of arguments and objections lay the raw essence of humanity, the thirst for justice. Aisha decided it was time to reflect this understanding in her closing arguments. She spent long nights poring over her notes, seeking a way to connect the dots between the evidence presented and the emotional truths that resonated within the courtroom walls. She envisioned a climactic moment where she could channel the collective strength of the victims, reminding everyone why they were gathered there, to seek not just retribution, but a sense of closure. As she stood before the jury on the last day of the trial, her heart raced. The room was hushed and every eye was fixed on her. Aisha's voice steadied as she recounted stories of those who had suffered, stories that were often overshadowed by the defense's technical arguments. Each account was a beacon of resilience, illuminating the stark reality of their pain and the courage it took to confront their past. This trial is not merely about the facts, she declared passionately, her words resonating throughout the chamber. It is a testament to the human spirit, to the rights of those silenced by fear and despair. The weight of our shared experiences must not be ignored. They are the foundation upon which we build our fight for justice. These are not just cases, they are lives, tangled in a narrative that deserves recognition and truth. As she finished, a hush settled in the room, the impact of her words hanging heavily in the air. Aisha allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, taking a deep breath before stepping back and letting her closing statement sink in. The jurors glanced at one another, a flicker of understanding passing between them. They were no longer mere spectators. They were part of a revolution, a shift towards empathy and accountability. The jury deliberated for days that felt like an eternity. Aisha found herself caught in a whirlwind of anticipation and dread, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension. In quiet moments, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point, the sacrifices of her clients, and the fierce determination that fueled her mission. Finally, the day arrived. As the jury filed back into the courtroom, the tension reached a fever pitch. Aisha held her breath, her heart pounding in rhythm with the footsteps echoing against the polished floors. When the foreman stood to deliver the verdict, time seemed to freeze. Every person in the room held their breath, their fates intertwined in that split second of uncertainty. The words guilty echoed through the room, breaking the stillness like a thunderclap. Aisha felt a rush of emotions, relief, triumph, and a deep sense of responsibility. This victory was not just hers. It belonged to every person who had dared to share their truth. As tears glimmered in the eyes of the victims, Aisha knew this was just the beginning. In the aftermath, the story of the trial began to reverberate throughout the community. It sparked conversations about justice, healing, and change. Aisha became a focal point for those seeking to reclaim their narratives and advocate for their rights. The impact of their fight transcended the walls of the courtroom, inspiring others to speak out and seek justice, igniting a flame of hope that would not easily be extinguished. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Aisha felt invigorated, aware that she was part of something larger than herself. She pledged to continue championing the cause of justice, dedicated to ensuring that no voice would go unheard in the pursuit of truth. Despite the mounting pressure, Aisha maintained her resolve. She immersed herself in every detail, combing through evidence, reviewing case law, and finding connections that others overlooked. Her late nights at the office became a part of her routine, fueled by a potent mix of caffeine and an unwavering belief in justice. In her heart, she knew that her commitment was about more than winning a case. It was about dismantling the narratives that perpetuated victimization and silence. Each morning, Aisha arrived at the office before dawn, her mind already buzzing with strategies and leads she couldn't wait to pursue. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead felt like a constant reminder of her mission, transforming hours of digging into actionable insights. With every page she turned, she was not just uncovering facts, she was weaving a narrative of resilience and power for her clients, people whose voices had been silenced for too long. As the deadline for the case approached, Aisha began to notice the pressure between her colleagues, a mixture of anxiety and tension that threatened to bubble over. Yet she remained focused, often stepping into the break room to find small moments of peace, sipping her coffee while staring out the window. The city was waking up, vibrant and pulsing with life, and she took solace in the thought that, beyond these walls, people were living their lives, unaware of the battles being fought in courtrooms. One afternoon, a conversation with her mentor, a seasoned lawyer with decades of experience, illuminated another layer of her resolve. "You have a gift, Aisha," he said, leaning back in his chair, his voice steady and commanding. "But remember, this work is not just a fight against injustice. It's also an exercise in empathy." His words resonated deeply, reinforcing her understanding that the cases she handled were not just legal obligations, but stories of humanity, woven together by pain and perseverance. That evening, as she prepared her presentation for the upcoming hearing, she reflected on the faces of the clients she represented. Each one had a story that embodied struggle, yet also hope. Inspired, she infused her slides with the nuances of each tale, ensuring that her argument transcended mere legal jargon and resonated with the emotional core of why they were all there, seeking fairness in a system that often felt rigged against them. The day of the hearing dawned bright and clear. Aisha stood at the threshold of the courtroom, taking a moment to breathe in the gravity of the occasion before stepping inside. The air was thick with expectation, the hushed tones of her colleagues blending with the sharp sound of heels clicking against the polished floor. As she made her way to the front, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Yet she stood tall, bolstered by the knowledge that she had done her homework, prepared every argument, and connected every dot. As the proceedings began, Aisha threaded her opening statement with the hopes of her clients, and with each word she spoke, she felt their spirits rallying behind her. To her left sat the defense, a bevy of stern-faced attorneys exuding confidence and authority, but Aisha knew that she had something they didn't, a fire ignited by purpose. She leaned into the energy of the room, her voice steady and unwavering, knowing that today was not simply about winning, it was about making a difference, about being the voice for those who could not speak for themselves. With each passing witness, the scales of justice began to tilt, albeit slowly. Aisha's closing arguments were not just legal rhetoric, they were a rallying cry for all those who had endured suffering at the hands of the guilty. She spoke passionately of truth, of the power of voices unite against oppression, and of the necessity of accountability. Her words ignited a spark among those in attendance, resonating with parents, activists, and friends who had gathered, their eyes glistening with the kind of fierce hope that only comes from shared experiences. As she stepped out of the courtroom, exhausted yet exhilarated, Aisha realized that this journey had awakened something profound within her, a deeper understanding of the role of empathy in the law. She began to see her responsibilities not as a burden, but as an opportunity to advocate for change, striving to not only defend the marginalized, but to amplify their stories in a systemic landscape that often silenced them. Aisha vowed to continue this fight, knowing that each step forward was a rebellion against despair, a commitment to light in the face of darkness. And from that moment onward, whether in or out of the courtroom, Aisha became a force of consistency and compassion, a champion for humanity who would never back down in her pursuit of justice. The road ahead would be long and fraught with difficulties, but she was prepared to walk it, step by determined step, embodying the change she wished to see in the world. As evidence was presented and witnesses were called, the trial took on the rhythm of a carefully choreographed dance, each participant playing their role to perfection. Testimonies interwove details of financial transactions about questionable practices and misappropriation of funds, yet beneath the technical legal jargon lay deeper implications. The defense methodically questioned the motives and backgrounds of the officials involved, hinting at personal vendettas and systemic corruption. Judge Emerson's interjections were frequent. At times, he would allow fleeting snickers at remarks made by defense counsel concerning the expected competence of the state's legal representatives. When curious glances were cast toward Aisha, a woman with striking brown eyes and an unyielding presence, one could sense an undercurrent of contempt. His gestures, small though they were, bore the unmistakable mark of his bias. A dismissive wave here, a sarcastic remark there. It was as if he sought every opportunity to undermine the integrity of those who did not fit his narrow vision of authority. Yet Aisha maintained a steely composure. Each time Judge Emerson's words rang out with a hint of disdain, she would simply listen, take notes, and respond with measured arguments when her turn came. The prosecutorial team, albeit aware of her brilliance, had quietly observed how her professionalism echoed through the case. Up until that point, Judge Emerson had conducted the proceedings with the preconception that the prosecutorial team was led by an assistant, a subordinate whose presence was largely ceremonial rather than authoritative. Midway through the trial, during the cross-examination of a key witness, a moment arose where Aisha's voice, clear, concise, and unwavering, commanded the entire courtroom's attention. With a deft command of legal nuance and an empathy that underscored the human cost of the alleged crimes, she dismantled the witness's testimony piece by piece. Each question was laced with precision and an articulate insistence on verifiable facts. It was at this juncture that some members of the courtroom, especially members of the defense team, began to exchange knowing looks. There was something undeniably authoritative about the way she led the questioning, something that belied a career spent in the highest echelons of the legal system. As the trial progressed into the later sessions of the day, a series of unexpected interruptions led to a subtle yet significant shift in the narrative. The trial had taken an unexpected detour when new evidence was submitted, a series of official documents that required immediate validation by the court's administrative records. The documents detailed the credentials of the legal team representing the state, and among them was a folder bearing the title Office of the Chief Prosecutor. Judge Emerson, who prided himself on being knowledgeable about every procedural detail, ordered the court clerk to verify the contents of the documents immediately. As the clerk skimmed through the pages, murmurs rippled across the courtroom. The pages revealed a name that carried significant authority within the legal community: Aisha Roberts. In that frozen moment, an unsettling question reverberated through Judge Emerson's mind. The woman he had seemingly dismissed as a subordinate, someone merely present in the courtroom, was not a junior member of the team at all. She was, in fact, the very embodiment of the state's prosecutorial power. The revelation struck him like a thunderclap. For a few suspended seconds, silence reigned him. Eyes that had searched for confirmation of his own biases now flickered with uncertainty. A murmur of shock and disbelief spread among the court personnel. The once unassailable facade of Judge Emerson began to show signs of genuine discomfiture. His face, usually impassive behind layers of judicial authority, betrayed a dawning realization of his own folly. "It appears there has been a misunderstanding," Judge Emerson finally pronounced, his voice tinged with a rare note of hesitation. "I understand now that the representation of the state is headed by Prosecutor Aisha Roberts." His words echoed immutably in a chamber that had so far trusted his every utterance. But beneath that tone lay an unmistakable undercurrent of remorse and a tentative search for redemption. A man forced to confront the consequences of his entrenched prejudices. The revelation catalyzed an immediate ripple effect within the courtroom. Members of the prosecutorial team straightened in their seats with a renewed sense of validation, while the defense team exchanged glances, a mixture of surprise, indignation, and caution. For many who had harbored hopes of reform and equality, this was a moment laden with the promise of change. Aisha, who until now had maintained a reserved and professional demeanor, allowed herself a small, measured smile, a silent acknowledgement of the long road that had led her to that very moment. Despite the inherent challenges and systemic obstacles that she had refused to let diminish her spirit, standing in that courtroom was a testament to her unwavering commitment to justice. The veil of anonymity that her role had inadvertently donned was now lifted by the incontrovertible proof of her position. As the judge's initial shock gave way to an internal reckoning, he became more introspective. In his earlier remarks, there had been a pattern, a series of dismissive gestures and offhand comments that now took on a new, painful clarity. In a brief moment of vulnerability, which few in the courtroom ever witnessed, Judge Emerson's eyes clouded with regret as he recognized that his own biases had compromised the decorum he so proudly claimed to uphold. "I apologize," he murmured, his voice barely audible, as if the words themselves were fraught with the weight of years. "My actions and assumptions have been misguided, and I regret any offense caused." The courtroom, once echoing with the somber cadence of dissent, now sat in a reflective silence as the judge's admission hung in the air. It was a small step, perhaps, but one that carried an enormous symbolic significance. In that moment, justice was not only about upholding the law, but also acknowledging human fallibility and committing to learn from one's mistakes. The trial resumed with a renewed sense of purpose. Aisha, now standing fully recognized as the state's lead prosecutor, resumed her role with greater vigor. Every word she spoke was weighted with the clarity of having overcome systemic prejudice. Her questions were sharper, her observations more incisive, and her dedication to the victim's cause glowed with an unwavering commitment to fairness. The evidence was meticulously laid out, and with every testimony, she built a narrative not solely about financial misconduct, but also about the long-standing inequities that had allowed injustice to fester. In stark contrast, Judge Emerson was forced to navigate the remainder of the trial with an acute awareness of his former ignorance. The balance of power had subtly shifted. His earlier assumptions now felt fatally compromised by the undeniable fact of Aisha's credentials and prowess. Each time he exchanged words with her, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Gone was the air of unchallenged superiority, replaced instead by a palpable humility that was rare for someone in his position. The defense, too, recalibrated their approach. Their confidence, once buoyed by the notion that they were facing a prosecutorial team led by an inexperienced or subordinate member, began to erode. They found themselves stymied by questions that demanded both legal precision and an understanding of the broader societal implications. The scale of justice, which they had perhaps underestimated, was now tilting away from their favor. Outside the confines of the courtroom, whispers and conversations among journalists and onlookers had already begun. News of the revelation was splashed across headlines, igniting debates on systemic discrimination and the hidden biases that could plague even the most respected institutions. For some, it was a vindication of long-held suspicions. For others, it was a necessary reminder that the journey toward equality was fraught with obstacles, both overt and covert. In a later recess, when the formal procedure allowed for brief personal interludes, Judge Emerson retreated to his chambers in the courthouse. The deep silence of the overcast afternoon was punctuated only by the rustle of legal documents and distant echoes of footsteps in the corridor. Alone with his thoughts, the judge confronted the magnitude of his actions. Not only the overt display of prejudice, but the subtle, insidious practices that had defined much of his long career. In the quiet solitude of his office, he replayed the events of the day. His mind, once so certain of its convictions, was now a battleground of introspection and regret. Every dismissive remark, every demeaning gesture aimed at Aisha and others he deemed lesser was laid bare before him. The realization was as painful as it was enlightening. He had allowed personal biases to cloud his judgment, to undermine what justice truly demanded. The scales of the law, which he so assiduously tended, had been unbalanced by his own hand. As his eyes trailed over the case files, he saw reflections of a long history, a series of decisions made under the influence of outdated prejudices that had, in many instances, contributed to a lingering sense of inequity within society. It was in this intimate moment of reflection that he resolved to mend what he had broken. Whether it was possible to undo a lifetime of bias remained uncertain. However, acknowledging his errors was the first step. His remorse was genuine, and as he penned down a quiet note of apology to himself and symbolically to those he had wronged, he recognized that every institution could evolve, every mind could change. Back in the courtroom, the proceedings resumed with a spirit that had taken on a deeper resonance. Aisha Roberts, now visibly aware that the barriers of prejudice were beginning to crumble under the weight of truth, continued to present her case with a blend of compassion and steadfastness. Every sentence she delivered was a call for accountability, not just from the defendant, but from a system that had long been marred by biases. Aisha paused for a moment, her piercing gaze sweeping across the jury, searching for signs of understanding. She knew that these 12 individuals held the power to shift the trajectory of not only this case, but perhaps the larger narrative about justice itself. With a determined breath, she continued, her voice steady and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, we stand at a crossroads. What you decide here today goes beyond just the fates of those involved. It sends a message to our community and indeed to the world. Are we prepared to uphold the principle that justice is blind, or will we allow prejudice to taint our judgment? The air in the courtroom was heavy with anticipation, each individual hanging on to her words as if they held the key to unlocking a deeper truth that had long been ignored. Aisha deftly wove personal stories into her arguments, illustrating the human impact of the system's failings. She recounted the experiences of those affected by the biases that too often dictated outcomes behind the closed doors of the judiciary. As she spoke, the expressions on the faces of the jury shifted subtly, reflecting the internal battle each member was facing. Aisha could see that some were grappling with their own preconceived notions, while others appeared determined to approach the evidence with fresh eyes. This was, after all, a chance for them to redefine their own beliefs about righteousness and equity. Suddenly, the defendant's attorney interjected, attempting to steer the conversation back to the alleged facts of the case. "Your Honor," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "we must remember that this trial is about the evidence presented, not a discussion on societal issues that lie beyond its scope." His words echoed through the courtroom, a stark contrast to the hopeful air that Aisha had tried to cultivate. Aisha maintained her composure, feeling the weight of his challenge. "Respectfully, counsel," she replied, "this case is emblematic of a much larger issue, an issue that speaks to the heart of our legal system. When we ignore the circumstances surrounding this trial, we trivialize the voices that have long been silenced. We diminish our responsibility to ensure that justice is not just a word we utter, but a reality we manifest. The judge, having listened attentively to both sides, leaned forward with an expression of gravitas. I urge both counsel to remain focused on the case at hand, while recognizing that the context is crucial for understanding the bigger implications at play. With that, he returned his gaze to Aisha, encouraging her to continue. Revitalized by this reinforcement, Aisha stepped back into her narrative, drawing on the strength of her convictions. It is a privilege to be in this courtroom, and I do not take that privilege lightly, she declared. But we must confront the truths that reside within these walls. This isn't just about one individual. It's about every person who has been treated differently simply because of who they are. Her words hung in the space between them, filled with the promise of a new dawn if only they had the courage to seize it. As the day progressed, the rhythm of the courtroom seemed to shift. Aisha felt a renewed sense of hope, emboldened by the possibility that together they could forge a path toward a more equitable future. The journey toward truth was one worth undertaking, and she was determined to lead the way, one compelling argument at a time. During a subsequent witness testimony, the focus shifted to the intricate web of financial transactions indicative of corruption in municipal contracts. The defense's strategy was to deflect attention from the systemic abuses, suggesting that the evidence was circumstantial and that the state's reliance on hunches concealed deeper judicial failings. It was in this moment that Aisha rose to her full potential as the lead prosecutor. With each meticulously crafted question, she dismantled the defense's attempts at obfuscation. Her tone was measured, respectful, yet unequivocally demanding precision and accountability. Her arguments went beyond the immediate case. They resonated as a broader commentary on systemic injustice. Justice, she declared in one particularly powerful moment, is not served by half-truths or by institutional comfort. It is served only when every individual is seen for who they truly are, equal in dignity and rights. Let today be a testament that our system, flawed though it may be, can acknowledge its mistakes and work to rectify them. The courtroom was silent, each person wrapped in the gravity of her words. Even those who had long espoused the ideals of impartiality in the law found themselves deeply moved. It was a call to look beyond external appearances and social constructs toward a more nuanced understanding of justice, one that embraced every individual, regardless of the color of their skin or the shape of their history. As the trial entered its final phase, both sides prepared to deliver their closing arguments. The defense, having seen their earlier tactics crumble in the face of Aisha's incisive cross-examinations, reiterated the theme that the evidence was insufficient to support the claims of systemic malfeasance. Their tone, however, now lacked the earlier assuredness, as if the weight of Aisha's revelations had left them grasping for a narrative that could still sway the scales in their favor. Judge Emerson, entrusted with overseeing the culmination of this high-stakes trial, listened intently as Aisha rose to deliver the state's summation. In a voice that was both calm and authoritative, she wove together the threads of evidence presented during the trial, linking the seemingly isolated incidents to a larger tapestry of corruption and human fallibility. Far from a mere recitation of facts, her argument was a call to conscience. It spoke of the dignity of every person impacted by the alleged crimes, and it gently chastised an institution that had too often overlooked the value of every individual. In this case, Aisha stated, we find not just evidence of wrongdoing, but the echoes of voices silenced by prejudice. Today, we stand together not solely for the sake of legal resolution, but for the affirmation of a truth that every human being is entitled to dignity and respect. It is incumbent upon us, the judges, the lawyers, and every citizen, to ensure that the scales of justice are balanced by the weight of our collective humanity. Her words resonated deeply. The courtroom, which had borne witness to the slow unraveling of outdated prejudices, now seemed charged with a hopeful promise. Even Judge Emerson's earlier missteps were, in that charged silence, met with a willingness to evolve, a recognition that true justice demanded self-reflection and continuous reform. After Aisha concluded her closing remarks, a heavy silence settled over the courtroom as both sides awaited Judge Emerson's final decision. In that charged moment of expectancy, the judge's mind wrestled with the dual realities of legal obligation and personal accountability. The echoes of his earlier moments of bias reverberated in his thoughts, but so too did the undeniable proof of Aisha's professionalism, competence, and unwavering dedication. At last, Judge Emerson cleared his throat and, with deliberate care, delivered his verdict. Based on the evidence presented, he pronounced, and the testimony of all involved, the court finds that the actions in question were not isolated incidents, but are part of a broader pattern of misconduct. It is the judgment of this court that significant reforms are necessary to prevent future injustices that compromise the dignity of those entrusted to our society. His words carried both the weight of legal authority and a personal acknowledgement of the failures that had transpired within the hallowed halls of justice. The verdict was not solely a condemnation of those who had committed misconduct. It was an implicit call for systemic rectification, a promise that the legacy of prejudice, however deeply ingrained, would be met with unwavering efforts toward equality. In the days that followed, the case became a catalyst for nationwide discourse on racial discrimination in the judicial system. Legal scholars, community leaders, and everyday citizens engaged in passionate debates about the need for reform. Aisha Roberts, now widely recognized not only as a formidable prosecutor, but also as a symbol of resilience in the face of implicit bias, was frequently invited to speak at forums, community centers, and academic panels. Each time she spoke, she reiterated the conviction that justice, true justice, was only attainable when every member of society was treated with dignity and respect. For Judge Emerson, the events of that trial and the long, reflective hours spent in his chambers sparked an inner transformation that only time could measure. His subsequent opinions and decisions bore a quieter, more contemplative tone. Though he could not erase the past or undo the harm caused by his earlier biases, he resolved to use his remaining years on the bench as an opportunity to atone for his missteps and to champion a judiciary that was both fair and inclusive. In one of his later public addresses, Judge Emerson spoke with humility about the inherent imperfections within every individual and every institution. "I stand before you today," he admitted, "not as a flawless arbiter of the law, but as a man who has learned painfully that the true spirit of justice lies in embracing every person's humanity. Each of our decisions, every word we utter in this courtroom, has the power to uplift or demean. May we all, regardless of our station, remember that behind every case, every file, every docket, there lives a human story deserving of respect." These words, hailing from a man once embroiled in his own prejudices, resonated far beyond the walls of the courtroom. They ignited conversations in communities, in law schools, and in institutions grappling with the legacy of bias. In countless discussions, Judge Emerson's transformation was hailed as both cautionary and hopeful, a testament to the possibility of growth and the healing potential of self-awareness. The trial that had once been consumed by the dynamics of hidden prejudice gradually assumed a higher purpose. It became a mirror, reflecting the imperfections of a system long steeped in tradition, yet struggling to keep pace with modern ideals of equality and justice. Aisha Roberts, whose poise and resolve had weathered the storm of discrimination, became an enduring symbol for those who believed that dignity and human rights were non-negotiable. In public forums and media interviews that followed, Aisha often recalled the moment in the courtroom when the truth of her identity was revealed. A moment that, for her, was not about personal vindication, but about the broader necessity of challenging entrenched biases. In that charged silence, she once remarked, "I saw not only the shock of those around me, but also the opportunity for transformation. When we confront prejudice, bare and unadorned, even the mightiest among us are forced to reconsider their convictions." Her words served as an educational call to action, a reminder that every system, no matter how venerable it might seem, was vulnerable to the corrosive effects of discrimination. Justice, she argued, demanded that each person, whether a judge, lawyer, or citizen, remain ever vigilant against the encroachment of intolerance. Every chapter of our legal history, she emphasized, should remind us that the strength of our society lies not in rigid adherence to outdated norms, but in our commitment to evolving our understandings of equality and human dignity. As the years passed, the trial that had once tested the limits of the judicial system gradually passed into legal lore, a case study in the urgent need for institutional change. Law students pored over transcripts of the proceedings, and legal scholars dissected the layered interplay of prejudice, power, and redemption. In academic journals and public debates, the story of Judge Emerson's awakening and prosecutor Aisha Roberts' unwavering professionalism was cited as a turning point in discussions of racial equality within the judicial arena. For many, the case served as a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the midst of a system riddled with historical inequities, personal transformation and collective accountability were possible. The trial underscored a profound truth, that justice is not static. It is an evolving concept that thrives when every individual is recognized in their full humanity, free from the shackles of prejudice. In community centers and public debates that followed, individuals recounted how the story had influenced their perceptions of authority and fairness. Mentors spoke to young jurists about the importance of questioning assumptions, and activists cited the trial as evidence that change, however slow, could begin in even the most hallowed halls of power. Today, as society continues its long and often arduous journey toward genuine equality, the legacy of that remarkable trial endures as a poignant reminder of the stakes involved. Each courtroom, with its stark walls and solemn proceedings, stands as a microcosm of the larger social order, an arena where the fragile fabric of justice is woven and occasionally torn. It serves as a battleground for ideals, choices, and human connections. If vigilance is not maintained, old prejudices and systemic inequities can easily recast themselves, solidifying into institutional practices that hinder the progress toward true equity. However, that pivotal day also illuminated a powerful lesson. The capacity for awareness and humility can dismantle even the most entrenched systems of injustice. The participants in that trial, jurors, legal representatives, and observers, saw firsthand the transformative power of open dialogue and self-reflection, realizing that the quest for justice is not merely a legal obligation, but a moral imperative. Aisha Roberts, in her numerous subsequent endeavors, has embraced the mantle of not just a prosecutor, but also a passionate mentor dedicated to nurturing the next generation of attorneys, particularly those hailing from underrepresented communities. Her commitment to reforming practices within the legal system has garnered her numerous accolades. Yet she remains acutely aware that her work is far from complete. Every time I step into a courtroom or engage with a young lawyer, she shares thoughtfully, I am reminded that our duty extends beyond merely enforcing the law. We must cultivate a culture of respect and empathy that can resonate within the walls of every legal institution. Through her tireless advocacy, Aisha exemplifies the belief that systemic change is a continuous journey, one fueled by compassion, understanding, and an unwavering commitment to justice for all. Meanwhile, the transformation of Judge Emerson stands as a powerful testament to the enduring lesson of personal accountability, a concept that resonates deeply within the heart of the legal profession. His journey, marked by the painful acknowledgement of his own biases and the societal structures that perpetuate injustice, illustrates a profound truth. True authority lies not merely in the unyielding assertion of power, but in the genuine willingness to listen, learn, and evolve. Understanding that the law must evolve alongside society, he implemented sweeping reforms aimed at educating judges and court personnel on critical issues of diversity, inclusion, and the insidious nature of implicit biases. These initiatives have sparked a broader conversation across the judiciary, compelling both seasoned practitioners and new entrants alike to grapple with the urgent need for systemic change that reflects the diversity of the communities they serve. In reflecting on this transformative journey, members of the legal community are increasingly recognizing that every trial, every verdict, and each moment of introspection holds the potential to contribute to the slow but steady march toward a more just society. The modern trial that illuminated the true identity of prosecutor Aisha Roberts transcends mere case study. It evolves into a dynamic narrative that underscores the essential truth. Every human being, regardless of their background or circumstances, deserves to be seen, heard, and valued. This case serves a dual purpose. It challenges legal norms while simultaneously promoting a narrative of resilience and empowerment, urging legal professionals to confront their own preconceptions and biases. As the dust settled in the waning moments of that historic trial, the message reverberated throughout the courtroom and beyond, clear and unwavering. Justice must be blind to superficial differences, yet acutely aware of the intrinsic worth of every individual. The echoes of this groundbreaking case lingered long after the audience had departed, a heartfelt call to all who operate within our legal systems. It served as a call to action to strive for fairness relentlessly, to challenge biases, both overt and subtle, and to ultimately ensure that the dignity of every person is not just acknowledged, but actively upheld. This transformative moment acted not only as a milestone in legal history, but also as a catalyst for ongoing discussions about ethics, empathy, and the essential role of humility within the realm of justice. The story of Judge Emerson and prosecutor Aisha Roberts will continue to inspire debates, legal reforms, and personal reckonings across the nation. Their experiences resonate beyond the confines of the courtroom, sparking discussions about the systemic inequalities that persist in everyday life. It serves as a potent reminder that the journey toward equality is a continuous one, built upon the willingness not just to acknowledge one's flaws, but to actively engage in the difficult work of self-reflection and change. This journey demands courage and resolve, and it calls for a commitment, beyond mere rhetoric, to the ideals of justice and human rights that underpin a fair society. Through her calm, unwavering resolve, Aisha has shown that leadership is not about dominance or asserting power, but about embodying empathy, integrity, and the tireless pursuit of truth in every interaction. In her measured tone and composed demeanor, one can hear the echo of a promise that every person, regardless of race or gender, has the inherent right to be treated with respect and fairness. Each courtroom appearance becomes a testament to her dedication, emphasizing that true justice is not an abstract concept, but a lived experience for all. And in the quiet remorse of Judge Emerson, there lies a powerful hope that even the most entrenched biases can be overcome through humility, ongoing education, and a conscious effort to listen and learn from those who have been marginalized. Today, as societies worldwide grapple with pervasive issues of discrimination and inequality, this modern trial stands as a beacon of hope, a narrative constructed not from the grandiose proclamations of power, but from the quiet determination of individuals who believe that justice must always serve humanity. This story illuminates the vital reality that justice is not solely the domain of legal professionals. It is a collective responsibility that every citizen shares. It is an enduring lesson that every decision in a courtroom, every word uttered in pursuit of truth, carries the potential to shape a future where dignity and human rights are not merely aspirations or ideals, but tangible realities that are woven into the fabric of society, uplifted by the actions of those who refuse to accept the status quo. May this story, interwoven with its trials, moments of revelation, and ultimately its hard-won triumph over entrenched prejudice, serve as a poignant reminder to all of us that the journey toward true justice is neither swift nor simple, but rather a steadfast path that we must collectively navigate. In every step we take together, we confront the weight of history while uplifting the narratives of those who have been silenced. Each voice contributes to a chorus that demands respect, equality, and the enduring promise of a brighter tomorrow for all. And so, as the echoes of the gavel fade into the annals of history, the message remains ever potent, a rallying cry for continuous reform, the vital importance of ongoing education, and an unyielding commitment to cultivating a judicial system that honors and protects every individual, irrespective of their background. Justice, as it unfolds in our ever-evolving society, invites us not only to reflect on our past mistakes, but also to challenge the status quo. It calls upon us to harness the collective power of empathy and action, transforming our community into one where the light of fairness radiates brightly upon every soul, illuminating the path to genuine equality and understanding. In this pursuit, let us all remember that justice is not a solitary endeavor, but a shared responsibility, as we work hand in hand toward a future where each individual is valued and cherished. This is not merely a story of a trial, but the story of a society in transition, a society pledging to rise above the darkness of prejudice and to embrace the full splendor of human dignity. At its core, this trial serves as a microcosm for the larger societal struggle, unfolding with every witness testimony, every legal argument presented, and every heart that beats in search of justice. The measured silence that enveloped the courtroom following the verdict was not just an outcome of a legal process, but a profound moment of collective awakening. The message was crystal clear. The pursuit of equality is the truest form of justice, and every trial, every revelation, and every reform must be a step towards that noble ideal. This moment became not just a part of legal history, but an emotional milestone etched into the collective conscience of a community yearning for change. In the end, the modern trial stands not as a relic of past mistakes, but as a promise for the future. A future where every judge, every lawyer, and every citizen is empowered by the knowledge that justice is not defined by the color of one's skin, nor by gender, but by the shared values of respect, equality, and the inalienable rights of every human being. Each courtroom deliberation signifies more than just an isolated event. It is woven into the very fabric of societal evolution, fostering a climate where fairness prevails and biases are dismantled. This trial acts as a beacon, lighting the way for those who have been silenced, urging every citizen to recognize their role in nurturing a just society. As the sun emerged from behind the clouds on that fateful day, it symbolized more than the end of a difficult trial. It heralded the coming of a new era in which the ideals of dignity and human rights are enshrined in every decision made within the corridors of justice. The symbolism of that radiant sun was not lost on the gathered crowd. It represented hope, renewal, and the unwavering belief that progress is possible, even in the face of adversity. And it is this legacy, born from a moment of painful revelation, that will continue to inspire generations to come. Each decision taken with integrity becomes a thread in the larger tapestry of justice, reinforcing the notion that our collective future relies on the courage to confront and challenge the status quo. Let this narrative serve as an enduring educational reminder. The fight against discrimination in every form is a collective responsibility. It is a call to action, urging us all to not only acknowledge the systemic barriers that exist, but to actively engage in dismantling them. When we confront the hidden biases that seek to divide us, we pave the way for a society where justice is not an ideal, but a lived experience for every citizen. By fostering dialogue and understanding, we promote empathy and connection, essential components in the ongoing quest to build a world where every individual is valued and respected. The power to create change rests in our hands, and together we can forge paths of equality and create a lasting impact that resonates through time. In the annals of history, the modern trial of Judge Emerson and prosecutor Aisha Roberts will remain a testament to the transformative power of truth, echoing through time as a beacon of hope and resilience. This landmark case serves as a vivid illustration of the struggles and triumphs that fuel the relentless pursuit of justice in a world often marred by prejudice and division. It highlights the courageous individuals who, armed with conviction and unwavering faith in the law, dared to challenge the entrenched systems of inequality. As we reflect on the proceedings, we are reminded that while the journey to equality is fraught with obstacles, legal loopholes, societal pressures, and ingrained biases, it is our collective duty to confront these challenges head-on. Every step we take, no matter how small, is a vital contribution to the realization of a just and compassionate society. The narratives woven through this trial are not only about the characters involved, but also about the shared responsibility we bear to dismantle the barriers of discrimination that still persist, ensuring that all voices, including the most marginalized, are heard and valued. This case underscores the notion that justice is not merely a conceptual ideal to aspire to. Rather, it is an ongoing commitment to foster an environment where empathy and fairness dictate the social fabric, creating a legacy that future generations can appreciate and build upon.